At Thanksgiving dinner, my parents said I was a useless failure and threw me out. Go live in the streets, they ordered. But they did not know I earned $25 million a year, so I just smiled and left. 3 weeks later, their carefully constructed world fell apart. I can still smell the expensive wax polish on the dining room table, mingling with the heavy scent of roasted sage and cranberry. It was the same table where, for 32 years, I had been seated at the farthest end, always near the window, and always in the shadow of my sister, Crystal. The room was staged for perfection. Crystal glasses, the linen starched stiff, the lighting soft and unforgiving, designed to showcase the Hartmans' curated life. My father did not lower his voice or soften the blow. He looked me straight in the eye, in front of every relative at that table. The uncles, the aunts, the cousins who had always treated me like an inconvenient secret, and delivered the final judgment. "You are a useless failure, Everly," he said. The words clean and cold as an Arctic draft. He then raised a finger, pointing it with theatrical precision toward the front door. "I am tired of your embarrassment. Go. Go live in the streets. If you cannot manage to make something of yourself." There was no whisper. There was no pretense of shame on his part. It was a clean public execution of my standing in the family. I instinctively looked to my mother. Her perfect, elegant face was utterly still. She did not blink. She offered no defense, no flicker of maternal instinct, confirming she was an accomplice, not a victim. Beside her, Crystal hid a smile in her napkin, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of satisfaction that cut me deeper than my father's shouting. It was the smile of someone witnessing a scene they had been waiting their entire life to see played out. My chair suddenly felt 1,000 miles away from anyone who had ever claimed to love me, and the realization was almost relieving in its brutal finality. I did not fight. I did not cry. Those were the reactions they had always expected, the ones that confirmed their narrative me as unstable and immature. Instead, I stood slowly, smoothed the lapels of my coat, and walked out. I moved quiet and steady, carrying their judgment on my back like a weight. I had finally stopped pretending was not there. They had no idea I was the CEO of a successful firm, and had generated over $25 million in net worth through sheer force of will. Long ago surpassing anything my father had ever built. The moment the cold, damp Portland air hit my face, something shifted inside me. It was not anger, it was clarity. The knot in my stomach, the one that had held all my hopes for their approval, loosened and dissolved. 3 weeks later, everything they thought they controlled collapsed right in front of them. I had built my life without their validation, and now I would simply live it without their permission. But before I tell you how I executed the legal, quiet revenge, I need to tell you about the Hartmans. My name is Everly Hartman, and if you saw my family from the outside, you would swear we were picture perfect. But perfection makes a great disguise. I went back to Seattle, but the silence was deafening. It was 3 days after the Thanksgiving dinner, and the air in my penthouse, usually a sanctuary of calm and control, felt hollowed out. I should have been focused on the fourth quarter strategy calls and product reviews that I handled with sharp focus, but my mind kept drifting back to that stiff, unforgiving table in Portland. It was not just the sting of my father's words. I had survived worse. It was the way my mother did not even flinch. The complicity in their silence, and the greedy glint I had caught in Crystal's eyes. They were so confident in their version of me, the version they had spent 3 decades creating. Growing up, I learned quickly where I belonged, and more importantly, where I did not. Crystal, my younger sister, was the son my father always wished he had. She was the golden child, the chosen one. My parents spoke her name like an accomplishment, a polished trophy. They mentioned mine like an inconvenience. Crystal received violin lessons, specialized summer programs, and private tutoring. I, on the other hand, was handed chores and a constant reminder to be grateful that Crystal set such a good example. I was the architect of absence. I did not fit the Hartman mold, which required perfect poses and predictable obedience. While Crystal spent her teen years perfecting the art of the holiday card photo, I stayed up late, teaching myself how to code, how to build automated systems, and how to fix things people did not even know were broken. At 16, when other girls posted pictures of prom dresses, I was quietly launching my first online project. A sleek tool that solved a niche security problem. My family called it a quirky face. When I left college early, a necessary sacrifice to chase the real world. Opportunity I had created, they said I embarrassed them. They never once asked what I was creating. They only asked what the neighbors would think. By the time I turned 32, Crystal had become everything they wanted. Polished, charming, and loud enough to fill a room. I had become everything they dismissed: quiet, independent, and unwilling to shrink myself to fit their expectations. And the quieter and more successful I grew, the louder they rewrote my story for me. According to their narrative, I was not building companies. I was just messing around online. I was not successful, I was struggling. The Thanksgiving humiliation was not new. It was just the first time they had said the quiet part out loud for everyone to hear. But humiliation, I learned, rarely ends in the moment it is delivered. It has an aftershock. Mine arrived 3 days after the dinner. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, when my phone buzzed with a message from Lily Chen. Lily, my cousin, was the only person in that family who ever treated me like more than a shadow. The text read, "Everly, I need to tell you something. Your mom's been talking." My stomach tightened instantly. "Talking how?" I texted back. A pause. Then the next message dropped like a stone. "She told everyone at church you are basically homeless in Seattle. Said your internet hobbies finally fell apart, and you're staying on couches for now." I set the phone down on the granite counter. The room spun for a second. Homeless. Couch surfing. Failed at life. They had not just thrown me out, they had actively rewritten the story of my life, doing it with the same confident authority they used when calling Crystal a genius for simply breathing. I've texted back, the absurdity fueling a dry laugh. "I have a 3-bedroom penthouse." Lily's reply was the line that cut deeper than the lie itself. "I know. They don't want to know." They did not want to know the truth. Knowing the truth, that everything they had mocked, minimized, and dismissed had turned into success they could not control, would force them to face their own failures as parents. That knowledge hardened my resolve, turning the lingering hurt into a controlled, simmering anger. The aftershock had arrived, and I was about to feel the fault line open beneath my feet. The initial sting of the slander, the pain of knowing my family actively desired my failure, was just the aftershock. 2 days later, that aftershock turned into a full-blown fault line. I was finishing up a product review call, my mind still grappling with Lily's words, when an email slid into my inbox from a law office in Portland. The subject line was chillingly formal. "Confirmation required for your guarantor status." Guarantor for what? I had not signed anything financial for anyone in years, least of all my family. I opened the message and, for a moment, the breath left my lungs completely. The email referenced a renovation loan. A massive sum of around $400,000, taken out 2 years earlier. And according to the attached legal records, my name was listed as the sole guarantor. I clicked on the file containing the scan of the signature. One glance, and every nerve in my body went cold, then numb. It was a perfect forgery of my name. It was not a sloppy tracing. It was skillful, precise, and utterly terrifying in its cold calculation. I had never signed anything for them, and I certainly would not have guaranteed a loan of that magnitude. especially one partially funneled into Crystal's boutique. The little vanity project she bragged about like it was her destiny. The forgery was undeniable. I stood in the profound quiet of my kitchen, the Seattle city lights glittering against the floor, to ceiling glass, and let the truth settle like ice in my veins. They had not just humiliated me and slandered me to their social circle, they had stolen from me. They had committed financial fraud using my identity. The Thanksgiving humiliation suddenly made cruel, perfect sense. They needed me to be small, powerless, and easily dismissed. If the loan ever collapsed, which the email hinted it was doing, slipping toward default, I would be easier to frame as unstable. A struggling failure who had defaulted on her commitments. They were building an escape hatch for themselves, using my reputation as the door. The realization that they genuinely believed they had the right to do this. The right to use my name, my credit, my success. Without my knowledge, was the ultimate betrayal. It stripped away the last remnants of my desire to ever reconcile or even understand their twisted motivations. That night, something inside me finally stopped breaking and started sharpening. The first thing I felt was not anger, but an incredible, almost frightening clarity. It was cold, steady, and focused. For the first time in years, I was not trying to understand them. I was not trying to excuse them. I was not even trying to win them over. I was simply and irrevocably done. But being done did not mean walking away and letting them drag me down into their financial cesspool. Being done meant drawing a line they could never step over again. If they were going to pull me into a mess they created, I would make sure I controlled how the unraveling proceeded. My first call was to my attorney in Seattle, a man known for his methodical precision. The game had officially changed from family drama to legal survival. I was ready to play. The moment I hung up with my attorney, the emotional mess of the last few days settled into a cold, hard knot of focus. I had walked out on the humiliation. Now, I was facing a serious, criminal betrayal. I spent the entire next morning combing through every document the Portland law firm had sent, payments, and records tied to the renovation of Crystal's boutique. Every single financial trail confirmed the same truth. Huge sums had been moved without transparency, and the loan, secured with my expertly forged signature, was slipping fast toward default. If it officially defaulted, the lender could seize assets, force a sell-off, and initiate debt recovery proceedings. And if my name remained on that fraudulent paperwork, I would be legally dragged down with them. I forwarded everything to my attorney, James. He called within minutes, his voice grave. "Everly, this is beyond sloppy," he stated. "This is deliberate, targeted financial fraud." "I know," I said, the words steady. The clarity I had felt the night before was now the operational mood in my office. "Are you sure you are ready to pursue this?" James pressed. "Once we open this door, the consequences for them won't be quiet." "That is precisely the point," I confirmed. I wanted separation, and separation required finality. We began the process immediately. We verified the handwriting inconsistencies on the documents, meticulously tracked the flow of money into Crystal's business and other Hartman family accounts, and documented every piece of financial misrepresentation. The deeper we looked into the family's recent lifestyle upgrades, the new landscaping, the expensive European trip my mother had boasted about, the clearer one pattern became. My parents and sister had built their updated life on borrowed money. Not earned. Not saved, but borrowed with my name as their safety net. That realization did not hurt. The pain had already been done at the Thanksgiving table. What hurt was how naturally they must have believed I would never fight back. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was weak, that my independence meant I was too busy or too naive to see the massive financial burden they were attempting to shift onto me. They never factored in my technical precision, my resources, or my legal team. They had fundamentally failed to grasp the scale of the person they had dismissed for 30 years. 3 days into the comprehensive review, James called again. If the loan continues sliding at this rate, the lender may consider transferring control to a qualified buyer who steps in to absorb the debt. I stared out at the gray expanse of the Seattle skyline, the rain sweeping low over the water. And I am qualified, I stated. You are more than qualified, he corrected. You have the capital, the credit, and the legal standing as an interested party, given the forgery. If you want the option to take over the debt, and thereby control the assets tied to it, I can initiate the process now. I paused for a long moment, the phone cool against my ear. This was the critical pivot point, the move that changed my defensive posture into a powerful, legal offensive. This was the path to absolute separation. Do it, I told him. Start the process today. That decision felt like lighting a fuse. Over the next 2 weeks, my team and I moved quietly and deliberately. We positioned Everly Hartman, the supposed useless failure and homeless couch surfer, to legally acquire the controlling debt for the Portland house and Crystal's boutique. This was not vindictive, it was protection. It ensured that if they pulled me into a mess they created, I would have complete control of the unraveling process. And I would be the one to determine the boundaries of the fallout. And still, throughout those 2 weeks of quiet, surgical action, not a single person from my family called. Not to apologize, not to explain, not even to lie. Their silence was almost poetic, while I built the very outcome that would change everything for them. The 2 weeks following the decision to acquire the debt were the quietest, most powerful period of my life. I was no longer waiting for their approval or bracing for their next insult. I was building a barricade, a legal wall between my genuine success and their toxic failure. Every morning, I watched the Seattle fog burn off the water, and I felt that same internal landscape clearing too. I focused intensely on my own business, pouring the kind of $25 million focus required for software development into strategy, while James and his team handled the operational end of the acquisition. The process was cold and methodical, every step documented, every move compliant with the law. This was not revenge. It was simply me cleaning up the financial damage they had inflicted and ensuring it could never happen again. As the second week drew to a close, the financial reports grew grim for the Hartmans. Their sporadic payments had stopped entirely, and the loan was spiraling into critical territory. They must have been frantic, though they maintained their perfect public facade in Portland. Utterly oblivious that the useless failure they had evicted was about to become their primary creditor. By the time the third week hit, James confirmed it. His email was short and precise. The loan is officially entering default. We have secured your position as first in line to acquire the paper. I closed my laptop slowly. The cold clarity from the night they threw me out returned. Sharp and absolute. 3 weeks ago, they told me to go live in the streets, publicly declaring I had nothing. Now, I was legally about to own the ground they stood on, along with Crystal's coveted boutique. The irony was a heavy, metallic taste in my mouth, but there was no triumph, only steadiness. We spent the next 4 days preparing the final documents. This required extreme focus. We drafted the notices, outlined the formal repayment terms, and structured the final offer, which would present them with 2 options. Option 1: sell the properties immediately, to resolve the debt cleanly. Option 2: if they chose not to sell, Everly Hartman would assume ownership, and they would remain as tenants under a strict, structured rental contract. The terms were designed to be fair, legal, and human, offering a path forward without cruelty, but demanding accountability. What I did not expect was a call from Portland the day after the documents were finalized. It was not my parents. It was Mason West, Crystal's husband. He was never a mean man, Just a nervous, weak-willed one, easily manipulated by the Hartman's pretense. His voice was low, urgent, and laced with genuine panic. "Everly," he whispered, "you need to know Crystal is panicking. Your parents think the lender is coming after them, or worse, that the bank is going to force us an immediate sale. They do not know it is you." A pause stretched between us. "I don't think they'll handle it well," Mason finally admitted. I almost laughed. Handle it well. They had forged my signature, humiliated me, flew and slandered me across 2 states, then expected the universe to protect them from the fallout. But I did not want their panic. I wanted their understanding, not of my success, but of the boundaries they had violently broken. I knew this could not be delivered through paperwork. It needed to be face to face. "Mason," I said, my voice calm, "meet me at Bellevue House, Friday dinner. Bring them." He exhaled loudly, like he had been holding his breath for days. "They think the lender wants to negotiate a settlement." "Good," I confirmed. Let them walk in believing that. The strategic misdirection was essential. I wanted them to arrive confident, ready to charm and manipulate, only to have their entire worldview legally shattered by the person they had systematically discounted. The stage for the ultimate confrontation was set. The decision to meet them had solidified everything. This was not just about debt and forgery. It was about reclaiming the power they had abused for 30 years. I knew they would arrive armed with excuses and charm, ready to negotiate with a faceless entity, unaware they were walking into a confrontation with the person they had tried to erase. Friday came, cold and quiet, draping Seattle in a thick mist that clung heavily to the windows of the restaurant's private room. Bellevue House was understated and elegant, the setting itself chosen to prevent any possibility of a public scene. The table was set for 5, my parents, Crystal, Mason, James, and me. I arrived early with James. He was calm, stacking the necessary folders neatly on the polished wood. We were ready. The air was thick with expectation, though externally, I was a study in professional composure. I wore a simple black dress and a quiet confidence that felt earned, not inherited. It was not a look of vengeance, but of finality. This was the stage for truth. When the heavy oak door opened, the first person I saw was my mother. Her posture was ramrod straight, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. But beneath the carefully constructed mask, her expression was tight, strained with the effort of pretending everything was still fine, still under control. My father walked behind her, his jaw locked with a familiar tension. Crystal trailed them, her eyes red, rimmed. But there was still a hint of defiance in her set shoulders. Mason hovered awkwardly in the rear, looking like a man who already regretted his participation. They did not greet me. They offered no pleasantries, no inquiry about my supposed homeless status. They simply focused on the task at hand, saving their life of pretense. "Everly," my mother said carefully, taking her seat across from me. Her voice was too loud, too bright. "Would truly appreciate you helping arrange this meeting with the lender. We are confident this is all a misunderstanding that can be quickly resolved." She smiled at James, clearly mistaking him for the bank's representative, a man who could be charmed into forgiveness. James exchanged a swift, measured glance with me before settling his own presence at the table. He did not waste time. "Mrs. Hartman," James said, his voice measured and professional, the tone instantly commanding the room. "There is no misunderstanding, and I am not the lender's attorney." My father frowned, his confidence suddenly faltering. He gripped the edge of the table. "Then why are you here? Who is representing the bank?" "Because," James answered, sliding the first folder, the one detailing the assignment of debt, forward. He gently pushed it across the table, until it rested in the center. "Between my parents and Crystal, Ms. Everly Hartman is the acquiring party. She now controls the debt." Silence. It was not a gasp or a shout, but a thick, agonizing silence that descended upon the room. It was suffocating, heavy, and profound. Crystal's breathed first, a sharp, tiny noise, quickly covered by her hand flying to her mouth. My mother's hand shot up to her own throat. My father's face drained of all color, the blood retreating instantly, leaving him looking suddenly old and hollowed out. I did not savor the moment. I simply watched the truth land. Watching the realization that the useless failure they threw out had just bought the paper on their home and their daughter's business. My father was the first to recover enough to speak, his voice a raw, wounded sound. He pointed a shaking finger at the papers. You bought our loan. Everly, why in God's name would you do that? Because, I said softly, leaning slightly forward, my voice cutting through the remaining silence like glass. You put my name on it. My mother shook her head rapidly, a desperate, rapid motion of denial. We thought you would understand, Everly. Crystal needed help. Your father meant well. Forging my signature on a $400,000 loan is not meaning well. I corrected, my tone remaining dangerously even. Calling me a failure at Thanksgiving is not help. Telling people I am homeless across 2 states is not concern. It was calculated fraud and cruelty. Crystal finally snapped, her composure shattering. She pushed her chair back slightly. Why could you just not let it go? She accused, her eyes glossy with tears of fury and self-pity. You have money. You don't need this. I looked at her the way I might look at a stranger who wandered into the wrong story. She still did not grasp the core issue. You are right. I do not need this money. What I need is my name not tied to a sinking loan you all pretended did not exist. What I needed was honesty and respect. Since you were incapable of providing either, I have decided to provide myself with safety. James, sensing the end of the emotional preamble, slid the next document across the table. These are the final terms, he announced. You have 2 options. 1, sell the property immediately and fully resolve the debt. Or, if you choose not to sell, Ms. Hartman will assume ownership. And you may remain as tenants under a structured rental contract. My father whispered the words in disbelief, the weight of the realization crushing him. We have to rent our own home. It is not your home. I corrected gently, but firmly. Not anymore. Crystal glared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. You are ruining everything. No, I said, meeting her glare. I am ending what you started. I am simply cleaning up the collateral damage you created when you decided my life was disposable enough to secure your deception. The dramatic tension was nearly unbearable. A silent battle of wills won by the party with the strongest legal hand. The ultimate power shift was complete. The air in the private room was thick and electric, heavy with the weight of shattered denial. My father's question, "We have to rent our own home," hung there, a mournful echo of a life they had already lost the moment they signed my name to that fraudulent loan. My mother burst into quiet, broken sobs. They were not sobs of guilt or sorrow for the harm they had inflicted upon me, but purely the sound of terror, the terror of losing the curated life she had spent decades building for others to admire. "We are your family, Everly," she choked out, tears running tracks through her perfect foundation. "How can you do this to us?" I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. The movement was slow, deliberate, drawing their focus completely. My voice remained steady, devoid of anger or satisfaction, carrying only the absolute conviction of self-preservation. "You taught me exactly how," I said, letting the simple truth land between us like a hammer blow. "The night you threw me out, you publicly declared I should go live in the streets. You said I was useless, that I had nothing. But the truth is, you never knew me at all. You were willing to sacrifice my financial life, my reputation, my peace, for Crystal's vanity project. You only cared about maintaining your facade." I paused, allowing the gravity of the betrayal to fully sink in. Mason, sitting beside Crystal, looked physically ill, staring at the tablecloth. Crystal refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to glare at James, the messenger of the legal fate. "I am not here to punish you," I continued, pushing the last vestiges of my emotional past with them away. "I am here to separate myself permanently from choices that were never mine. I am here for accountability, not an apology, because an apology from you would not be real." James, sensing the end of the confrontation and the beginning of the legal timeline, spoke up. "The terms are clear. You have 7 days to decide between selling and resolving the debt cleanly, or accepting the rental agreement under Ms. Hartman's ownership." The meeting ended abruptly after that. There were no hugs, no handshake, and no shouting, just stunned silence. My parents stood up stiffly, my father appearing defeated, the bluster drained entirely from his posture. My mother was silent, patting at her ruined makeup. They left the room looking smaller, shrunken by the consequences of their own entitlement. Crystal was the last to leave. She paused at the doorway, turning back. Her eyes were still glossy, but the defiance had been replaced by a deep well of self-pity and entitlement. "You could have helped me, Everly," she whispered, her voice cracking with the injustice she felt. "You have all that money. You could have just paid off the loan." "I did help," I said, my answer firm and final. "I helped by making sure you, and Mom and Dad, finally faced the consequences of your fraudulent choices. Just not the way you wanted." Then, the door closed behind them. I let out a slow, deep breath I realized I had been holding for years. It was not the breath of triumph, but the breath of release. The tension in my shoulders, the lifelong brace I had carried, finally slipped away. James gathered his files. "That was clean, Everly. Emotionally devastating for them, but legally perfect for you. That is all I ever wanted," I confirmed. Safety. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cold night air. The mist had turned into a soft, cleansing rain tapping lightly against the pavement. 3 weeks ago, they told me to go live in the streets, believing I was beneath them. Tonight, they walked out of a building they no longer owned, facing a reality built entirely by the daughter they dismissed. And for the first time in my life, the distance between us felt like absolute, glorious freedom. I knew then that the healing had begun. The week that followed the dinner was louder in its silence than any confrontation could have been. There were no frantic calls, no desperate pleas, and no sudden, insincere change of heart from Portland. My family retreated into their own shock, consulting their lawyers, frantically searching for the loophole that did not exist. Every update I received from James came in the form of short, clinical messages, noting their hesitation, their anger, and their growing realization that the outcome was immutable. I did not want them ruined, but I needed them to face boundaries, and that is what I was delivering. On the 7th day, just hours before the deadline, the decision arrived. They chose to sell the house. It was the smartest option. It was the cleanest exit for everyone, including me. The sale of the property cleared the $400,000 fraudulent debt in full, released my name from every legal tie, and left them with enough capital to downsize gracefully into a smaller, more manageable place across town. No one was ruined, and no one was left desperate. They simply had to live within the means they had ignored and exceeded for years. The true consequence, however, was quiet. Crystal's boutique did not survive the transition. Without the steady, illegal stream of borrowed money and fraudulent guarantees, the business folded within a month. She posted a vague, self-pitying message online about needing new beginnings, never once mentioning the financial fraud or the debt. My parents retreated from the high society circles they once dominated, their curated image quietly replaced by something humbler, less visible. They no longer had the financial stage to perform their perfection. And me? I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. I felt whole. The sharp, cold clarity I had found the moment I saw the forged signature had matured into a quiet, absolute peace. I went back to my work, my successful life in Seattle. The one I had built brick by brick, without their validation, their permission, or their belief. For the first time since I was a child, my success was not something I had to carry in silence, or hide in fear of their judgment. It was simply my reality, unbothered by whether they acknowledged it or not. The weight of their expectation, the need to prove myself worthy, had finally slipped off my shoulders for good. I understood then that sometimes protecting yourself is not a loud, fiery explosion. Sometimes, it is choosing peace so decisively, so legally, that nothing chaotic can ever follow you home again. The confrontation at the dinner was the necessary surgery, but the quiet aftermath, the silence, that was the healing. I have not spoken to them since the dinner at Bellevue House. There has been no apology, no contact, and no attempt at reconciliation. And maybe that is the clearest sign of true healing, a silence that no longer aches. I built a life that is not shaped by their impossible expectations, their petty judgments, or their poisonous, rewritten stories. A life where my worth is not up for debate, because it is entirely self-determined. If any part of this felt familiar to you, if you have ever been the scapegoat for a family that prioritized image over truth, know that you are not alone. And if you have ever had to walk away and build an insurmountable boundary to save yourself, remember that setting boundaries is allowed. And choosing your own peace is the ultimate form of victory.